What are the ramifications of occupational licensure in America? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, how's your summer going? You're on vacation now, aren't you?
Yes, but even those on vacation have work to do.
Yeah, right. That's the thing about being a professor. You got, I would say, quote, work during the school year, and then, man, 3 months just paid vacation. It's awesome. All right, Richard, enough abuse of you. Let's talk about occupational licensure. I came across an article in the Boston Globe just a few days ago about the licensure of liquor stores in Massachusetts. And as it turned out, after prohibition was ended, they didn't have a free market in liquor distribution in Massachusetts, or really, I think, anywhere else in the United States, that they felt like they needed to license the distribution of liquor. And so they strictly limited the number of licenses. Well, you and I both know what happens when they do that. The price of licensing starts going through the roof because everybody wants a license, a liquor license, but there's only a certain number that are being handed out by the state. And so what happens is your cost of that liquor license soars because somebody can transfer their license to somebody else. It's much like the taxi cab medallion system in New York before Uber and Lyft. That whoever had those medallions had a lot of money. I think they went up in value to like $1 million at one point. And then Uber and Lyft come along and the value of the medallion plummets. Well, it's the same with these liquor licenses. And so they recently had a reform in Boston, I think it is, or maybe all of Massachusetts, where they're expanding the number of licenses. But what's interesting about this is the racist aspects of this, that they determined that the licenses were going to the well-to-do, the white parts of town, the big corporations, the chains that had influence, and that in the black areas of town with the restaurants and the bars and so forth, they weren't getting the licenses, and that this had a dramatic effect on a customer base. That most customers like a glass of wine or liquor with their meal, so they tend to go to the restaurants where they can have a drink with dinner, and therefore they would stay away from these areas of town that didn't have them, which of course dramatically impacted blacks. Now, one can say, oh, this is just all by accident. Maybe it is. I doubt it. I think they clearly know what's going on. And this is, of course, not the first instance of this. If you go to the South, to the southern states, you find occupational licensure is really a new Jim Crow. They use licensure to lock out of various occupations, professions, impoverished people, many of whom are blacks, like on hairdressing. That you can't do people's hair without a license. And what's it cost to get a license? It's like $15,000 because you have to go to a certification school. And they say, oh, this is to protect the customers. This is to protect the customers. This is pure nonsense. This is the way to keep blacks out of those professions and other poor people, and protect those professions for the well-to-do white people. The real fundamental question is, why have licensure at all? Why does the government have to grant permission to engage in an occupation or trade? And that's what I don't understand, why more people don't question that. That if liberty is a fundamental, natural, God-given right, which it is, we know that in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says that liberty and the pursuit of happiness are fundamental God-given rights. Why do you have to ask government for permission to sell liquor? or to engage in hairdressing, or shining people's shoes, or even engaging in medical occupation or attorney occupation. Why can't people just engage in whatever occupation they want without governmental permission? What do you think, Richard?
Well, first of all, I want to start off that I am deeply shocked and disturbed. For well over 30 years now, Jacob Hornberger has been espousing and, quote, selling the ideas of liberty without a license. How do we know he is qualified, experienced, having the necessary fair and balanced understanding of all sides of the issue? He basically is out there presenting the ideas of liberty as he has learned it just on his own. Has he gone to a government-approved educational institution to learn the ideas of liberty and how to present it in a fair and balanced and even way? Has he passed exams? Has he been awarded a diploma? Has he paid a fee to justify the ability to regulate and oversee his activities in this way? So to be honest, I now have serious doubts about all of Hornberger's arguments because they are not government-approved arguments against government. And I'm afraid that, you know, this is going to have to call for new federal regulation without a doubt. Now, I know I'm being sarcastic.
Well, wait, let me interrupt you though for a second, because I do think you're making a valid point, because there's an old saying that nothing worse can befall a good cause than to have it ineptly defended. And I think we would both agree that there are very inept defenders of libertarianism in the movement. I mean, that they alienate people rather than bring people in.
Yes.
So maybe we really should have government licensing the exposition and defense of libertarianism.
Well, of course, one of the fundamental responses is that it is the purpose of the market, that is the choices and decisions of the consumers in the society, to determine what they view as the better product, who can offer it with the features, qualities, and characteristics that satisfy their needs, desires, and conveniences. And that competition, in the long run, weeds out the inefficient, the incompetent, and the poorer quality, and rewards those who can deliver the goods better. Now, at the end of the day, this applies to ideas as well. Now, do right ideas always win out in the short run? Of course not. And does the battles for right ideas succeed? Not at all. But I can say this, since as you know, and some of our viewers and listeners know, for 5 years, I was the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE, from 2003 to 2008. And there is a free competition for donor dollars in the nonprofit sector. Government doesn't guarantee you donations. Government doesn't subsidize most nonprofits, certainly not in the venue of these kind of ideas. And you have to demonstrate to the donors who are giving of their own free choice in a smaller quantity, a larger quantity of a donation, that A, it's a worthy cause, and then to go back to them for their financial assistance to continue and hopefully to reward you with a greater contribution looking forward, that you've delivered the goods. What is your message like? Has it been persuasive? How many people have you reached? Are there any feedback mechanisms to demonstrate that those you've approached or you've educated through a seminar or through your publications, that they have helped persuade people? And the fact is, that's what donors would ask. And without being sort of narrowly like with quantitative matrices, though some people look for that or want it, you have to demonstrate that the giving that people provide for your intellectual charity of ideas delivers the goods and is a worthy cause and does it better given its niche or venue compared to others that are attempting to do the same way as breakfast cereals compete, or clothing stores compete, or grocery stores compete, or cell phones compete. And so the idea that in making the case for liberty, You are more persuasive or less persuasive, more effective or less effective, uh, giving a message that is in tune better with those whom you're asking financial support from, compared to a different or more diluted or less directed message, is all the same. People reward you for the services you rendered, given the goals and purposes that they share with you. And so the idea that Jacob Hornberger has not been licensed, hasn't gone to a government-approved Liberty Education Academy, doesn't have a government-approved diploma through some based upon some accreditation association like college and university, doesn't bother me in the least. And one indication of this, if I can put it this way, is that Jacob Hornberger has been the president of the Future Freedom Foundation for what, 33, almost 34 years now? And that itself demonstrates that he has passed a market test, that those who value the message in the principled way and the articulation of them and on the array of policy issues that are of concern to those who hold this point of view have rewarded you. Now, I'm sure that I would make the case that that more donations would enhance the message. But the fact is that you're staying the course in the niche that you've chosen for the foundation demonstrates that you passed a market test. And that demonstrates that you don't need a government license or a government-approved diploma or a government-approved accreditation association to determine whether you are qualified or not to present the case for liberty.
Well, thank you very much. It's very nice of you to say that. But, let's go back to this liquor thing, because, I ask the question again, why should government have to be giving permission to sell liquor? I mean, why can't anybody sell liquor? And as you say, let the market ferret it out. If somebody's not selling good liquor, he's going to be put out of business. Let the market ferret out who are the best liquor providers. Why should government make that determination, especially since it's almost always based on influence, political influence as to who gets the license? It's based on money, like in the hairdresser instance, you got to pay a lot of money to get the license. Here in Virginia, Richard, it's really bizarre. I mean, liquor arguably kills many more people than illicit drugs do. And yet here in Virginia, there is one sole provider of liquor, seller of liquor, and it's the state. The government is out here pushing drugs, which is really, liquor is a drug. It's a mind-altering substance, kills a lot of people, cirrhosis of the liver, and they don't even have licensure here. They have the government selling the liquor, killing people. I mean, it's just really bizarre. And from what I can tell, most of the citizens are just very passive about it. They just accept the notion that the government's out there selling liquor. Now, let's address another issue, is the one that you implicitly raised with your analogy here, the incompetence argument. Oh, that government needs to protect us from incompetent liquor sellers or incompetent hairdressers or incompetent shoe shine people. Well, the market determines that. And I mean, look at the law profession. I was a lawyer for 12 years, as you know, and lawyers have to be licensed. And the idea is to protect the citizenry from incompetent lawyers, unethical lawyers. You have to take a bunch of ethics courses to get your license, and you have to pass a test for ethics. Look around you. The bar, the law profession is filled with incompetent, unethical lawyers, and yet they all got licenses. So this notion that the licensure is protecting people is ridiculous. And let me make one final point here, and that's Milton Friedman. Friedman, was one of the libertarian economists, Nobel Prize-winning economists, that made the principal case against occupational licensure, mostly on utilitarian grounds, but also on the freedom ground that you should be able to engage in any economic enterprise you want without government permission. If you got to ask government permission to do something to sustain your life, you're not free, because freedom and permission are opposites. But Friedman said, I'm not going to take on the case of hairdressing. I'm not going to take on the case of shoe shine licensure and that sort of thing. He said, in order for people to understand the principle, you got to tackle the most important case, the hardest case, which, of course, in this case is medical licensure, because the argument is, oh, well, people will go to a quack for brain surgery. And so Friedman says, well, I'm going to tackle that one. And he did in his great essay, Medical Licensure, which we have posted on the website of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Fantastic piece. I think it was included in his book, Capitalism and Freedom, if I'm not mistaken. I would recommend everybody read it, because Friedman makes the persuasive argument, the solid argument as to why you don't need licensure in the medical profession. You don't need to worry about a quack, doing your surgery on your brain to remove a cancerous tumor. Because what do people do? They go to their personal physician, the diagnosis is made, they get a referral to another doctor. You can have private certifying agencies. You can still have the American Medical Association saying, here's our list of preferred doctors. You also have magazines that say top 20 doctors in Virginia. You can get recommendations from friends. Nobody just goes and looks in what we used to call the yellow pages. Now we call the internet and says, oh, that doctor there, I think I'm going to go to him. People do their research. And this is the point that Friedman was making, is that you don't need licensure to do this. In fact, Richard, licensure actually lulls people into a false sense of security. They think, oh, if that lawyer has a license, he must be good, he must be ethical. And so you actually lull people into hiring lawyers or doctors or other people they shouldn't be hiring at all. But it's because they have a license that people are lulled into thinking they're solid people.
Yeah. Since you're mentioning Milton Friedman's chapter on licensing in his book Capitalism Freedom from 1962, if I can offer viewers and listeners one other reference on the same theme. This is a book by a man named John Blundell. He used to be the president or director of the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. He passed away a few years ago, but I believe you can still download from the IEA website in London a great little book he wrote called Regulation Without the State. Regulation Without the State. And he begins by saying, what does regulation mean? It means to regularize, to have standards, to have benchmarks. And he says, you don't need the government to have standards and benchmarks. There are professional associations. There are product quality organizations. There are associations of insurance companies that are concerned with the safety of the products that they're insuring, because what they like to get is premiums and not payouts when claims are made. And he goes through this whole litany of the way the market has set up and offers non-governmental ways to have standards and benchmarks and assurances through certification methods, a way Friedman does actually, that does away with the need for the state. So his book, which was written several years ago, obviously, but is still timely with his principle and his examples, is called Regulation Without the State, on the website of the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. But let me mention a couple of general things the way you were as well. We met when we were both in Dallas, Texas. I was teaching at the University of Dallas, a story we've told many times. But I was living in a little town called Louisville. And right next to Louisville was another township called Flower Mound. Louisville was a dry county. Flower Mound was a wet county. Now, they're right next to each other. I mean, you cross the street, you're into the next little township. And so you couldn't buy alcohol in Louisville, but you cross the street, literally across the street, and there in Flower Mound was a liquor store. What the hell is the rationale for this? Other than that, there was obviously a strong pressure group in Louisville. Drink is bad for you. Oh, it's the liquor of the devil. Oh, you can't have people drinking. On Flower Mound, I'm hypothesizing that pressure was less, but there was a pressure. Well, if people can't drink in Louisville, we could have people buying here in Flower Mound, but if we license it, we're not only seeming to be controlling it. Yes, the religious people who drink is the agent of the devil, but at the same time, think of all the annual fees the city government gets from the licensing that charges that these selected liquor stores have to pay. So there's a strange perversity in that. And that is guiding most regulations. There's several elements in this. One is it's a way to generate revenue for the state, and the state can be either a municipality or a county government or a state government or the federal government. The other thing is that it serves special interest groups. Special interest groups in the sense that it narrows the capacity of outsiders to compete by limiting the number of people who can participate in a particular profession or occupation. You are, to use the economist jargon, limiting the supply. And given the people's demand for the product or the service, the smaller the supply, other things held the same, the higher the price is going to be. That generates larger potential profit margins, higher incomes than otherwise would be the case in a more open market. And then there is the other one is the people who, as you were suggesting, fall into a misguided perception. And that is when left alone, the consumer cannot be assured of the safety of the product or the service presented. Whereas the fact is, you were saying, merely because you're licensed, whether it be the hairdresser or the medical doctor, does not guarantee you that the services rendered or the product offered is going to be free of things that can be harmful to the consumer or less than you had hoped in terms of the quality offered. But what it does do, as you were just alluding to, is it lulls people into a false sense of security that if the state regulates it, this assures the quality of the product. But what it does, it retards improvements in the quality of the product. If new entrants are not allowed in, and again, whether it's a service or a commodity, some good that you want to buy, well, how does a new person enter the market? He thinks he can make it either better or cheaper or a variation that almost makes it different from all the others. And by limiting the number of new entrants, you therefore retard the capacity of that sector of the economy to be offering better and cheaper goods to the overall consumers. And therefore, it retards or reduces or prevents increases in the quality of life of everyone in the society.
Those are absolutely fantastic points. They really are, because it really is a revenue generating device in many instances. That you get a system of licensure. People have to pay the state or the city for the license. That's like a tax. It's generating revenue for the city or the state, and so there's sort of a conflict. They want to get as many licenses as they can to get as much revenue as they can, but they also know that they're trying to protect the people that have the licenses, and they can't issue too many because the whole idea is a protection racket. For example, in the law profession, I mean, there'd be people that could easily, do an uncontested divorce, probably for $100 or something. But if you try to do that, boy, the bar association will immediately go to court, get an injunction against you to shut you down because you're interfering with those lawyers that are charging $1,000 for an uncontested divorce. So by limiting the supply, it's a protection racket for them. It's absolutely a great point. And your other point is that in an unhampered market economy, you'd have all kinds of entrepreneurs in there providing goods and services. And so there's always a chance that one of them is going to come up with an ingenious method of selling the liquor or selling something else or doing the hairdressing and stuff. You never hear from that person because he doesn't have a license. He's locked out of that particular market because he can't afford. So you end up stifling an economy. And let me add one more anecdote here, and this is on marijuana legalization. This is really a fascinating phenomenon in terms of a statist mindset. So, as you know, Richard, they've legalized marijuana in many states. But what's fascinating is that they don't just legalize and leave it to the market. This is okay. You're going to sell marijuana. It's just a free market. Anybody wants to sell. So no, their statist mindset, which was the same mindset that had criminalized marijuana possession or distribution, is the same mindset that says we have to provide licensure here. We can't let a free market operate. We have to have licenses to sell marijuana. So they are saying, Who should get these licenses? Well, the most logical people are the people who had to serve time for marijuana offenses. This is the way we compensate them. They get the privilege of selling marijuana with a license. Notwithstanding the fact they may not be good sellers of marijuana, they may be very incompetent selling a bad product. That doesn't matter. We're compensating them for this. And not to mention the fact that there's tons of people out there that might sell a better grade marijuana, a safer grade marijuana, or any other drug that are locked out of this market because they weren't one of the ones that had been victimized by the drug war. This is utterly perverse, Richard.
Yeah, another thing is that it's important to realize that there was a time when these types of licensing requirements didn't exist. For example, there was in his own time, a rather well-known Italian historian named Guillermo Ferraro in the first half of the 20th century. Very much a classical liberal, limited government, free market fellow. He ended up on the bad side of Mussolini and was prevented from teaching or giving public addresses, almost a house arrest, but eventually he was able to leave in 1931 to Switzerland. But he visited the United States several times. And in the 1890s and in the early part of the 20th century, before the First World War. And in one of his books, he's talking about how America is different in so many ways than Europe. This is in the 1890s. And he's saying, one of the wonderful things in America is the avenues of opportunity, unlike in Europe, where professions and occupations are controlled and inhibited by the state and depend upon privileges. Whereas in America, none of this exists. Everyone can pursue any occupation, any profession that they chose, and demonstrate their worthiness to earn a living through the market. This is in the 1890s. You mentioned marijuana. The fact is that before the Food and Drug Administration came into existence, along with the income tax and the Federal Reserve around 1913, 1914, there were no federal regulations of hard drugs. Now, some states tried to do this, just as there were state prohibitions on alcohol. But the fact is that you could buy in many places in the United States cocaine and heroin right off the shelf in the drugstore, or at most with a doctor's prescription. Painkillers, help people who had anxieties. Now, did people abuse these things? Did people get hooked on these things? Of course, and that of course became the camel's nose in the tent. Oh, we have to prevent, the people are weak. They can't, make sound decisions. They don't have willpower. But the fact it was presumed that part of a free society is the individual to be responsible for his own life. And if people fall on the wrong side of making sound decisions, the responsibility is not the state's, but his family members, those who may belong to the same church or community organizations, the institutions of civil society, to help those who are most aware of this friend or neighbor who needs a helping hand or support or assistance in overcoming his handicaps, psychological, physical, in ways that only those closest to him can have a motive to want to do so and would know enough to do it most effectively. And so there was a time in America when these laws did not exist, and it was a better America, at least in those facets. As you've often pointed out, the 19th century was not a bowl of cherries for a lot of things, even in America. But one of the things in which they were freer than Americans today were in a variety of these avenues of commercial and economic activity. And in that sense, we are less free rather than more free.
Yeah, I mean, we know the 19th century wasn't a libertarian panacea, slavery being the biggest example, but I'm glad you mentioned 1890 because that's my favorite time in U.S. history, 1890 to 1910. I wish I'd been born in that era because it had to be terribly exciting. I mean, imagine no occupational licensure, income taxation, IRS, central bank, drug war, gun control, national security state, foreign interventionism. I mean, and then inventions were coming into existence every day. I mean, it had to be a really exciting time. People being free to engage in economic activity without asking permission. You You started businesses. People were everybody was starting businesses, and there was the greatest outburst of voluntary charity, and the whole world was coming to the United States because there was virtually no control on people coming over here. So it was a really exciting time. I'm going to wrap this up, Richard, by a point that you just made that, we've talked mostly about the utilitarian case against licensure, but what really matters is the freedom case, the moral case, that people have a right. And this is what to engage in economic enterprise without government permission. This is what Jefferson was talking about in the Declaration of Independence, that man has been endowed with certain natural God-given rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, property. It's not mentioned there, but property was another one. And life and liberty means the right to sustain your life. That's what that refers to. And how do you sustain your life? Through labor, by providing goods and services that other people are willing to trade for. And so whenever you have to ask for permission to engage in these natural God-given rights, you've destroyed the natural God-given right concept. You have now acceded to the notion that government is your daddy. Government is your provider. Government is your master. Daddy, may I engage in this occupation? That's not freedom. That's not a natural God-given right that pre-exists government. It's a privilege. It's saying, may I please do this? Yes, you may. Here's your license. And I think that's the point we really need to keep in mind the entire time that we're making these arguments, is that if you want to be free and you want to live in a genuinely free society, you've got to oppose these things lock, stock, and barrel.
I just saying that is the free society as the founding fathers conceived of it, and as advocates of liberty speak about it today.
All right. On that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for tuning in. If this is your first exposure to the Future of Freedom Foundation, Richard Wright, 34 years of presenting this principal case for liberty. Come and visit us at fff.org and subscribe to our FFF Daily Journal. Richard, enjoyed the conversation as always. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.